Hello, welcome back to this basic biblical Greek course. We are on lesson 9 today, and in today's lesson we'll be looking at contract verbs. We'll begin with a definition of contract verbs, and then we'll move on to looking at the various rules for contraction. Thereafter, we'll take some time to practice contract verbs, and as you are familiar with by now, we'll then do our vocabulary for lesson 9 and then practice using that vocab in our translation work. So I hope that you are excited to learn about contract verbs. Let's get going. Now, before we look at contract verbs, one needs to have mastered the Greek vowels, because Greek vowels play an integral part in understanding contract verbs as well as their rules. So if you remember, in the first lesson we covered the Greek vowels and we learned that there are 7 vowels, and they can be divided up into short and long vowels, and that refers to the length of time that it takes to pronounce a vowel. And so we learned that there are 5 short vowels: the alpha, the epsilon, the iota, the omicron, and the upsilon. But some of these vowels can be short or long. The ones that can be either or are the alpha, the iota, and the upsilon. But then there are some vowels that are only ever long, and that would be the counterpart of the short epsilon, right, which is the eta, as well as the short omicron, which when lengthened becomes the omega. All right, so I really want to encourage you to have memorized all 7 Greek vowels and to know which ones are short and long and which ones are only ever long. All right, it's crucial that you have a firm understanding of these vowels before we move on. But if you are familiar with them and you are confident that you know them, then let's continue with this lesson. There's one more thing that I'd like to revise with you before we look at contract verbs, and that is the present active endings with luo. So let me just remind you of those endings. The first person singular is luo, second person singular, luace, third person singular, lua, first person plural, luamen, second person plural, luete, and third person plural, luusin. So just remember that lu is the stem, which gives us the basic meaning of the verb, and then the endings are o, ace, a, we have amen, ete, and usin. Alright, so please just familiarize yourself with those endings and know them well. So these endings together with the Greek vowels are going to come into play now as we learn contract verbs. Alright, so now that we have done some revision of the Greek vowels and the personal endings of luo, let us now take a look at contract verbs, which is the topic of our lesson today. So the first point says, contract verbs are verbs whose stems end in the vowels alpha, epsilon, and omicron. Alright, so if you see any verb that has a stem ending in an alpha, an epsilon, or an omicron, then you have what is called a contract verb. The second point is when these vowels occur at the end of a verb stem, they are called contract vowels. Alright, so that is what we call the alpha, the epsilon, and the omicron. Alright, so contract vowels. So take a look at this example with me. Based on the components of a verb, the stem, the connecting vowel and the personal ending, here we have the verb agapar. And so we see that the stem of this verb ends with a contract vowel, the alpha, and therefore we have an example of a contract verb. Let's carry on talking about contract verbs. The next point here is that contract vowels, all right, so now that you know what they are, the alpha, the epsilon, the omicron, they contract with vowels of verb endings to form one new vowel or diphthong. Now, fortunately, this only occurs in the present and imperfect tenses. All right, so far, we only have to worry about the present tense forms because that's what we've been learning. But when we get to the imperfect tense forms, these same rules will apply. But outside of these tenses, contraction does not occur. And so here's just an example of the stem agapar again. All right, and here's a personal ending, ace. Right, and so basically what this first point was saying is that the contract vowel, which is the alpha, will contract, all right, with the vowel of the verb ending. So here we have a diphthong, the epsilon iota, and those two will contract to form one new vowel or diphthong. So let's take a look at some examples together. So here are three contract verb examples, and I just want to show you what we're talking about. And it's going to sound confusing at first because we haven't taken a look at the rules yet. But let me just show you what we mean by this idea of contraction. So you're familiar with agapar, and we see there that the contract vowel is an alpha. And if it meets the verb ending ace, all right, so here we've got the diphthong epsilon iota, then the new form is going to be agapas. All right, so you can see there that something has happened, and we call that contraction. So what you would expect based on what you've learned so far is agapar ace, if you just put them all together like that. So you see the alpha, epsilon, iota. However, contraction takes place, and so you have this new form here, the alpha with the iota subscript and the circumflex over the top. All right, so very similarly, the second example, you have poi e, and there you have the contract vowel epsilon meets the verb ending, the omega, to form the new verb ending poi o. All right, so you have the omega with the circumflex. And then the third example, you have play ra. All right, so there is the contract vowel, the omicron. It meets the verb ending amen. So we have here, this is actually a helping vowel. I'm trying to think of the word of it now. A connecting vowel, yes. And the new form is play ru men. So what is formed there is a diphthong with a circumflex. All right, so this might look very confusing to you because you don't understand why they've contracted like that. So let's now speak about the various rules that govern these contractions. So the first rule that I want to introduce you to is the fundamental rule of contractions. So the fundamental rule states that when a contract vowel and an ending vowel meet, one of them prevails in its long form. So look at the first example with me. So when the contract vowel and alpha meets the ending vowel, which is also an alpha, it's going to prevail in its long form, which is alpha. The second example, when you have a contract vowel, which is an epsilon, and it meets its counterpart, also an epsilon, it then prevails in its long form, which is an eta. This is why you need to know your vowels, and you need to know which ones are short and which ones are long. Now, the Omicron is not as neat and tidy as the alpha and the epsilon. So when two Omicrons meet each other, you're not going to end up with an omega, which would be its long form. You end up with a diphthong, an u, an omicron, and an upsilon. And in brackets there, this is further information, is that u is also formed from these two options, all right, when you have an epsilon plus an omicron or an omicron plus an epsilon, you're also going to end up with the diphthong u. All right, so this is the fundamental rule of contractions. When a contract vowel and an ending vowel that are the same meet, one prevails in its long form, and the omicron is an exception. The next rules have to do with a contract vowel and a single vowel ending. All right, just now we're going to speak about an ending that has two vowels, but let's first look at the rules that govern a contract vowel meeting a single vowel ending. All right, so the first rule under this umbrella is an O-type vowel, all right, so that's an omicron or an omega, prevails over other vowels and contracts to its long form, omega. All right, so let me read that again. An O-type vowel, all right, so a short form, the omicron, or the long form, omega, prevails over other vowels and contracts to its long form. All right, so look at these three examples with me. So we have the contract vowel and omicron, plus the vowel, the verb ending in alpha. The O-type vowel is going to prevail in its long form. So we have an omega. The second example, the contract vowel is an epsilon. The vowel of the verb ending is an omega. So when they meet, the long form, omega, is going to prevail. And then the third example, we have the alpha contract vowel. Once again, we have the omega vowel of the verb ending, and so we end up with the long form, the omega. Okay, there's always exceptions, and I've shown you these exceptions in the previous slide. So just remember, when you have an omicron plus an omicron, you would expect to have the omega form, all right, but that's not the case. We end up with the diphthong u, and that goes for the epsilon plus the omicron and the omicron plus the epsilon. All right, where you get your diphthong u. The second part under the rules for a contract vowel and a single vowel ending is if no O-type vowel is being contracted, the contract vowel will prevail in its long form. Okay, so remember the first vowel is always the contract vowel. So it is going to prevail in its long form because there is no O-type vowel which is being contracted. Right, so all these examples here are not O-type vowels. So let's see what happens. The first one, we have an epsilon plus an alpha. All right, so what is the lengthened form of the epsilon? If we have a look here, here's the epsilon, its long form is eta. All right, so we have the eta that prevails. The second example, alpha plus an epsilon. What is the long form of the alpha, we see here it's alpha. So that's why we have alpha. Third example, once again, we have alpha plus the eta. We end up with the long form of the alpha, which is an alpha. And the last example, when you have alpha plus an alpha, once again, we end up with an alpha. Okay, the only exception is when you have an epsilon plus an epsilon, right? So you would expect to have the eta, right? However, you end up with the diphthong A. All right, so you got to just be aware of these exceptions every now and again. Let us now take a look at our next big rule, which is rules for a contract vowel and a diphthong ending. So previously we looked at single vowel endings. Now we have a diphthong ending. And remember in the first lesson we looked at diphthongs. A diphthong is two vowels that are next to each other that are pronounced as one syllable. Right, so let's look at the first variation under this rule. It says if the second vowel of the diphthong is an upsilon, the upsilon drops out and the first vowel of the diphthong contracts with the contract vowel according to the rules and exceptions discussed previously. All right, so let's take a look at the first example together. So here we have the contract vowel, the alpha, plus the diphthong oo. All right, so the rule states here that the upsilon will drop out, and then the first vowel, the diphthong, all right, which is the omicron, is going to contract with the contract vowel according to the previous rules. All right, and according to our previous rules, this would follow the O-type rule because we have an omicron here, and it will prevail in its longest form, which is the omicron. And our second example, we have the contract vowel, the epsilon, plus a diphthong oo once again. And so the upsilon will drop out. And then the first vowel of the diphthong, the omicron, will contract with the epsilon. And remember, the exceptions is when an epsilon meets an omicron, we're going to end up with a diphthong. And so we have oo. Okay, so if this is very confusing to you, please watch the slide again and go through it over and over again until you are confident to move on. Let us look now at the second variation under the rules for a contract vowel and a diphthong ending. All right, so the rule states there, if the second vowel of the diphthong is a iota, even if only a subscript, the iota is retained as a subscript if possible, and the first vowel of the diphthong contracts with the contract vowel according to the rules and exceptions above. All right, so let's take a look at our first example together. So here we have the contract vowel alpha plus the diphthong a, and this ends with the iota, and according to this rule we want to retain it if only as a subscript. And so the rule states that the first vowel of the diphthong, the epsilon, is going to contract with the contract vowel, the alpha, according to the rules that we've learned. And according to those rules, that the contract vowel, the alpha, will contract in its longest form. All right, so the short is the alpha and the long is also the alpha. And so we're going to end up with an alpha, and we're going to retain the iota as a subscript. Look at the second example with me. Here we have epsilon, the contract vowel, plus the diphthong, which is eta with a subscript already. So we're just going to keep that subscript here. And the contract vowel is going to prevail in its longest form. So we have an epsilon which is short, and its longest form is the eta. So that's why we end up with the eta and the iota subscript. The third example, we have epsilon plus the diphthong a. And if you remember, this one was an exception that I mentioned to you earlier. When you see this, it's going to remain an A. Right, but there are one or two more exceptions that I just want to make you aware of. The exception here is Omicron plus anything with a iota will always be the diphthong oi. Alright, so Omicron plus anything else with a iota will always give you oi. And then the final exception, which is very rare, is an epsilon plus the diphthong oi. You end up with oi as well. Okay, so those are all the exceptions. I'm sure you'd be glad to hear that. Now, scholars have put together a chart that lists all the possible contractions. The chart is, of course, very helpful, but instead of memorizing it, you should memorize the rules and exceptions that explain it. And so that is why I've taken the time to go through the rules of contraction with you. And so I really want to encourage you to learn those rules and to learn them well. But this chart of contractions is a summary of all the rules that we've spoken about. So I want to just practice using this chart with you. So here's an example using the verb poie. So we see there that the contract vowel is an epsilon, and it meets a O-type vowel in its long form, the omega, and you then end up with poio. Now you'll notice there a circumflex over the top of the omega. So let's just read here quickly. If the accent falls on the contract vowel, all right, so which it does here, we have the acute over the epsilon, a circumflex will be placed over the resulting syllable. All right, as is the case with the example here. So how would we use the chart of contractions to understand what contraction has taken place? So if you have a look here, on the left-hand side here, it says that we have the final vowel in the stem, all right, called the contract vowel, which can only ever be the alpha, the epsilon, or the omicron. So because we've got the epsilon, all right, I'm going to circle it. At the top here, we have the suffix, all right, the connecting vowel plus the personal ending, all right, or we can just think of it as the vowel of the verb ending, which is the omega. So we look for it at the top here. These are all the options here at the top, but we want to focus on the omega. And so literally what we do is we just take our target and we follow along until the contract vowel meets the vowel of the verb ending. All right, so the answer then would be the omega. So that's how we end up with the poio, and we put a circumflex at the top. Let us now speak about uncontracted versus contract forms. So this paragraph says, in sentences, or we could replace that with verses in the Bible, contract verbs always occur contracted. But in the lexicon, their present active indicative first person singular forms occur uncontracted. Why? Well, in order to show the connecting vowel. So if you have a look at this table here, if we were looking up the word agapao in the lexicon, we would find it in its uncontracted form. So the first person singular in the present active indicative is agapao, and you will see that it will show the connecting vowel, which is the alpha. And so if we had to pass this entire paradigm, you will see that in each instance the connecting vowel is given, and so we can, based on the rules that we've learned, work out what the contracted form would be. All right, so the tricky thing is that in the Bible, these are the forms that we will find. Okay, and so we would have to essentially work backwards to establish what two vowels have contracted. But the circumflex is a really very important piece of evidence for being aware that a contraction has taken place. Okay, but just remember that in a lexicon we will find the present active indicative first person singular form in its uncontracted form to show us what the connecting vowel is. Now, I'm sure you've realized this by now, but the best way to learn Greek is to practice. And so I'd like to take some time now to practice the rules of contraction. So in this first exercise, let's identify the contraction. So in our first example, remember we're always going to place the contract vowel first, because that is the vowel that the stem ends with, and then it's going to meet either a single vowel or a diphthong of the verb ending. So here we have a, which is a diphthong. So what's going to happen? Well, we know that this first example is one of our exceptions, if you remember, and so the diphthong is simply going to remain. If you want to check that using our chart of contractions, we can. So let's go and find the contract vowel, the epsilon. And at the top we can find the diphthong A, and we simply move it to where they intersect with one another, and you can see there that yes, indeed the answer is A. Right, let's do our second example together. Here we have an alpha plus an eta. So what is going to happen here? All right, so there is no O-type vowel that is involved here, and so the connecting vowel is going to prevail in its longest form. Okay, and its longest form is an alpha. Okay, so it's going to remain an alpha. Let's just check if we are correct. All right, so we have alpha here. Let's find our eta at the top. All right, and where they intersect, we'll have our contraction. All right, so yes, it is an alpha. Okay, so as you can see, the chart of contractions is very helpful to confirm that we have understood the rules correctly. But once again, I just want to emphasize the importance of learning these contract rules. It really would make passing a lot easier for you going forward. The next one, all right, moving through this quickly, we have epsilon plus the omega. All right, and so we know that the O-type vowel is going to prevail in its longest form, so it's going to remain an omega. And then number 4, we have an omicron plus a diphthong U. And once again, this is one of our exceptions where the diphthong remains. Just want to check that. Omicron there. We have our diphthong at the top there. Let's see where they intersect. And yes, this is U. And the last one, we have alpha plus an A. This is where our diphthong ends in a iota. We want to keep that iota, all right, as a iota subscript. All right, and then the alpha and the epsilon are going to contract. the alpha is going to contract in its longest form, which is an alpha, and so we have our new contraction there. And just remember to include the circumflex, which I've done there for us. In the second exercise, I'd like to do some parsing work with you, where we identify the tense, the voice, the mood, the person, and the number for a verb. So let's do the first one together. So we have the verb zij two men. So we might be used to seeing the form like this. Zij tar men. Let's just say hypothetically, we would see here are men, but as you can see, we now have a diphthong with the circumflex, which is the sign that two vowels have contracted. But even though we don't know which two vowels have contracted, we can still parse this verb. So remember that contraction takes place in the present and imperfect tenses, and since we haven't done the imperfect, all of these will be the present tense. So the tense is present, the voice is active, the mood is indicative, the person is a first person plural. Okay, so we can parse this verb and therefore we can translate it. And just to let you know, we will be learning the vocab for each of these words shortly. The second one is poiete. Once again, we have our diphthong with the circumflex to show us that a contraction has taken place. But we can still parse this. It's a present, active, indicative, second person plural. Our third example is akalutho. So here we have a omega, should I say, with a circumflex showing the sign of the contraction. We can pass this as a present, active, indicative, first person singular. And then the last verb might look very foreign to you, so I just want to show you what contraction has taken place here. So we have the diphthong. So the word is starois, and this is a contract verb, so it ends in a contract vowel. So it would be stara, all right, ending in the omicron. And this is meeting a second person singular verb ending, which is ace. All right, and so the diphthong a has contracted with the omicron to form starois. All right, so if we had to parse this, it would be a present, active, indicative, second person singular. Right, in our third exercise, we're going to challenge ourselves a little bit, and we are going to parse all the forms of agapao, the first, second, and third singular and plural forms. All right, and I'm also going to help you by using the contraction chart here below, but also just to remind you of the rules as we go along. So the first one is agapao. So what are we actually doing here? Well, here we have the contract vowel, the alpha. All right, so the alpha is contracting with the verb ending vowel, which is the omega. All right, so according to our rules, the omega is going to prevail in its longest form. So our contracted form of agapao is going to be agapo, and we use the circumflex to show that the contraction has taken place. The next example is agapes. So here we have the alpha. All right, so the alpha is the contract vowel in all our examples, Right, our verb ending here, we've got a. All right, so it's alpha plus the diphthong a. And we want to retain that iota as even as a subscript. And the alpha is going to contract in its longest form, which is the alpha. So let's look at our new contracted form, which is aga pass. All right, with the iota subscript and the circumflex to show the contraction has taken place. Okay, and our third example, well, third person singular is agape. All right, so there we have the alpha plus the a again. So this is very similar. We have aga pa, which with the iota subscript and the circumflex. All right, if you just want to check those quickly, so we're only dealing with the connecting vowel, the alpha. The first one was the alpha with the omega, all right, which was the omega. All right, so that was correct. The second person singular, we had alpha plus the a. All right, so we check that. Yep, alpha with a iota subscript, that is correct. And our third person singular followed in the same suit. Right, then very quickly, the plural forms, we have aga pa amen. All right, so it's the alpha plus the omicron. And you should be aware now that the omicron will prevail in its longest form, which is the omega. Okay, so let's just now do our new contracted form. It's aga po men. All right, with the circumflex. Second person plural, we have the alpha plus the epsilon. All right, the alpha is going to prevail in its longest form, which is the alpha. So here we have aga pa te with the circumflex. And then our final one, the third person plural, we have the alpha plus the u. All right, let's use our chart of contraction for this one, the alpha. All right, when it meets the u is going to be omega. All right, and the rule states there that the upsilon would fall away, and then the normal rules would apply, and the omega would prevail in its longest form, which is the omega. So here we have aga po si, okay, with a circumflex. All right, here is a summary of the contractions. So in the previous slide, I did the example of agapao with you. And there's also the example of poeo in your notes that you can go through, as well as pleirao. All right, so each one of them gives you an example of a contract vowel. This one is the alpha, the poeo is the epsilon, and the pleirao is the omicron. All right, so download this onto your computer, print it out, and practice doing the contractions like I did with you previously. So let's take a look at our vocabulary for lesson 9. So as you can see here, all the various verbs that we are going to learn are all contract verbs. And while they contract verbs again, it's because they all the stems of these verbs end in either an alpha, an epsilon, or an omicron. So let me just highlight those all for you. And as I'm doing that, remember that they are in their uncontracted forms. All right, and that is very helpful for us because as you can see, as I'm highlighting here, you can see what the contract vowel is. Right, so let's just go through each of these words together. The first one is agapao, which you are familiar with now. It means I love. Then we have the noun form, which is agape, which means love. Notice there that it is a feminine gender. Next we have akalutheo, which means I follow, and it takes, pay attention to this, a dative direct object. Next we have genao, it means I bear or beget. Then we have zeteo, means I seek. Next we have kaleo, I call. Then we have laleo, means I speak. Right, so this vocab is quite tricky, and you need to learn it well. Zeteo, kaleo, laleo all sound very similar. Then we have parakaleo, which means I exhort, I comfort, beseech. Then peripateo, which, as you can see, is a compound verb. It's got a preposition in the front, peri, and it means I walk. Next we have plerao, means I fill or fulfill. Then we have poieo, I do or I make. Then we have staurao, which you've seen before, which means I crucify. Then we have tereo, means I keep. And then finally, we have one more noun for this lesson, phone, means voice or sound. Because we've done a lot of practicing on the rules of contraction in this lesson, we're only going to do one translation exercise today. So let's go ahead and read the Greek first, and then we'll look at the passing details together. So the Greek reads, A, agapomen ton theon, lalumen auto kai, poiumen ta erga autu. Alright, so let's go through each word together. The first one is A. This is a particle meaning if. Next we have agapomen. This is a verb. It's a present tense, active voice, indicative mood, first person plural. Alright, and just put in the lexical form there for you so you can see that the contract vowel was the omicron. Alright, so agapomen means we are loving. Then we have ton, it's an article. It's accusative, masculine, singular. It's modifying theon, which is a noun. Also, accusative, masculine, singular. Theos is God. Then we have lalumen. So you can see that a contraction has taken place there. This is a verb, present, active, indicative, first person, plural. Alright, lalumen, we are speaking. Then we have auto. Alright, and I remember in our previous lesson we looked at the third person personal pronoun. So this is a dative, masculine, singular from autos. Next we have kai, which is a conjunction meaning and. Then we have poiumen, also a contraction has taken place there. It's a verb, present, active, indicative, first person plural. There's a lexical form showing you that the omicron was the contract vowel, and this means we are doing or we are making. Then we have ta, which is an article. All right, ta could be nominative, but in the context, it's functioning as the accusative. It's neuter, it's plural. All right, we have erga, which is also a noun. also accusative neuter plural. Ta ergon means work. And then finally we have tu, which is also a third person personal pronoun. It's in the genitive case. It's masculine singular from autos. All right, so let's go ahead and translate this together. So A, if, agapomen, if we are loving, who, ton theon, if we are loving God. So now even though we have the article there in the Greek, we don't translate this as the God. We can leave the article out because it's a proper name. If we are loving God, the article is implied there. La lumen, we are speaking to him. Kai and poiumen, we are doing. Ta erga works, but then we have this third personal pronoun which is indicating possession. All right, and we can translate it his. So we are doing his works. All right, so we can translate this as if we are loving God, we are speaking to him, and we are doing his works.